get them to jump on their project.
Hey guys, everyone want to grab a seat at the table? Anyone who wants to pull up a chair? We've got Kevin Diamond here. I'm really pleased to have him. Kevin is CTO of the Black Tux, and today we'll have a chat with Kevin and welcome everyone to grab a seat at the table, and welcome Kevin. We can start back in early days.
Okay, sounds great.
When you came together with your co-founders to build HauteLook. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that experience. What was the spark that kicked it off and what brought you all together?
I was actually working for a venture capital firm, a very tiny one based here in LA. And in that role, I was supposed to be evaluating kind of different things that we were looking to invest in, but as well looking at things that we could launch kind of from our own. And one of the general partners went to Europe and heard about this company called Vente Privé, which was doing this flash sale e-commerce business, first we'd ever heard of it, and doing it really well. They were based in France and they were expanding, and they raised a round of capital at a massive valuation. And we thought, hey, this is a great business model and one that entirely doesn't exist in the US. And then probably one of the best things that happened to us was we started to ask around about this business model and found out that Kevin Ryan was formerly of DoubleClick, was already working on Guilt Group and had started that in advance of us. And so we knew if we wanted to be relevant, we had to launch pretty much right in line with them, or it would be not the story about both of us, it would be the story about them, and oh yeah, there's those people too. So we did what everyone should do, focused on just the customer experience, did not care about whatever we had to do on the back end to make the thing go live, how we were going to ship product out, how we were going to deal with returns, any of that stuff, that was all off the table for launch. Again, just being able to focus because we had such a hard timeline and a hard deadline really allowed us to focus on what was important and not spend too much time building things that, sure, were also important, but would never be seen by the customer, weren't important for actually testing whether the business model worked, and also just weren't important from the standpoint of being able to prove whether it's a successful model.
How did you build around that?
Built quickly. We were based in downtown LA, and we were in this little kind of showroom on the very top floor of a very old building, and we were adding people nonstop. So the joke was we hired 30 people, and I had 30 different desks during that time because I would keep giving up my desk and being like, "You work here. I'll just take the corner until the next desk arrives from IKEA." But it was about just kind of getting people in the door as quickly as possible, getting them ramped up on being productive, and so the things that I always looked for and was someone really smart and just able to get things done. And by having that was my bar, and it wasn't about like, do you know the technology we're utilizing? Do you know the e-commerce world? None of that mattered. You'd figure it all out when you're here because we're all figuring it out too. It was just about kind of having the brains to be able to tackle whatever challenge was in front of us and being able to not just be brainy about it, but also to be executable about it.
I'd be interested to hear your point of view on the relationship between product and engineering for early stage CEOs. How should people be looking at this?
I will never say that something is impossible because there is nothing that is impossible, but I will always tell you when it is much harder than it needs to be and that we should rethink it. And so because we had that open and honest conversation between the CEO and the CTO, that he knew I would never say, no, we can't do this, or no, we're not going to do this. But just as similarly, he knew that I would be the first one to tell him, I think that's a dumb idea. I think it's going to take way too much effort to do that. And therefore, maybe we put our efforts towards things that are more valuable. So the flip side to that is that both sides have to be open to the consequences of that. So hearing that an idea you might have might not be the best idea, and be willing to be like, okay, let me rethink this and let me think whether this is the right thing to do. And then on the flip side, on the tech side, that if you've raised that flag and they turn around and like, no, this is really important, be like, great, okay, I'm gonna buckle down, we're gonna get this done, and we're gonna figure out how to do it in the fastest way possible with the least number of people possible, and push forward. And so I think as long as you have that that understanding from the start, it helps dramatically.
As a technical co-founder, how
Yeah.
involved were you in other aspects of the business, like fundraising, for instance?
So fundraising, I was a little less involved in. Just kind of talking back to the start of the company, the fact that we were sort of a VC. Very shortly after, we're focused on kind of that Series B round, especially when our competitor was out raising very large amounts of money. That's when we went and got a seasoned executive, Terry Boyle, who became our COO and later now still serves as the president and the EVP. So my role was a little less on the financial side, but I'd say probably in most other parts of the business, just being that technical co-founder, I did have to dive into areas that I had never done before. And at one point, graphic design was under me, and I'm not, the guy that you would typically point to for running creative. In addition, photography was under me as well. I know nothing about photography or lighting or anything like that. But at that point, it's just how do you divvy up the pie of all the responsibilities and whatever it seemed like, okay, sure, what does photography need? Well, we hired somebody that knows lighting and knows cameras. He just needs to have a computer and know how to get the stuff off of there and get it onto something else. So great, I'll take care of that and help that person out and being more of a support than a leadership or a management arm to a lot of those early people that we brought on.
And now you're doing it all over again at Black Tux.
Yeah, a little bit. I'd definitely say it's now a little later stage than obviously when we started HauteLook. But definitely coming from, kind of seeing that scalability and seeing that happen, there's definitely areas where I'm able to provide a little bit of additional input. Like when I joined, they were using a piece of software that essentially was built for like your mom and pop kind of tuxedo shop. So it printed out a sheet of paper and it told you to check the boxes on what the items were that were supposed to go into the box. So one person would bring that sheet of paper and try and bring all the items together down to one place where then it would actually get scanned in and packaged up. Well, that's not the most efficient way to run a facility. And so now everyone's going to be walking around with these wrist-mounted Android devices with like Ring barcode scanners. And so it looks a little bit more high-tech, both from the standpoint, but also it's very directive. It tells somebody, hey, go here, grab this one item, send it down the line, and that's your part of fulfilling this entire order.
Customer success. And how you look at that, some of the things that you've learned along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure everyone has heard this, 1,000 times, which is test, 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 test. It's very important that the product people or your designers are putting together kind of mock versions of what you might want to do. Get that in front of a customer. Long before you actually have anyone writing lines of code against it. It's sometimes surprising that, the person didn't notice that the next button was down there, or that the cancel button was up top, and that wasn't a given, even though I've been staring at this for 2 weeks, and of course that's where those are. And that's really where the customer success kind of comes in, and part of that is understanding what that customer success looks like. So if you're building a feature, what are you trying to get? In e-commerce, oftentimes that relates back to conversion or a registration or, a few of these kind of touch points. But oftentimes, especially when you're just tweaking something, it might just be as simple as, I want to see someone get to that next step at a higher rate than maybe we did before. And it's just as important for your engineers and your technologists to understand what those metrics are so that they understand what they're building, that kind of why you're building something and not just the what of what you're building.
Any advice you have on hiring the first non-founder engineer into a company? I think a lot of people around the table are going through or will go through that process. And it'd be interesting to hear from your point of view.
I definitely would say don't try and find someone who is extremely specialized because you want to get rid of that one part of what you're doing. Again, look for people that are full-featured, and if they are those things, no matter what you put in front of them, they're going to figure it out. Sure, maybe it'll take them a little bit longer to do the CSS than if you had gone and hired a strictly front-end engineer. But at the end of the day, you're going to have someone who can offer so much more, and you don't know the balance of what the work really is going to be when you are such a small team. So definitely go for, broad, go for very smart, go for adaptable, because they might be doing one thing today and doing an entirely different thing tomorrow. And as well, it's you have to find someone who's extremely passionate and believes in what you're doing. They can't be there just for the paycheck. And that comes with that kind of intelligence piece of it as well, as being smart enough to know what the market opportunity is, why you're doing things, not what you're doing.
How much time do you devote to growing their softer skills in terms of engineers? Being able to communicate with the rest of the product team, being able to embrace that testing and vision aspect versus throughput, like getting product out the door?
I really feel like it's important that you understand, is communication important? And for some teams, that matters a little less, because you're trying to solve a extremely technical type problem, and you need someone who has no problem, putting the headphones on and staring at code for 18 hours to kind of solve that underlying technical issue. But on the flip side, if your culture is about like, hey, we are a team that likes to have fun, we are a team that wants to discuss things and figure out and test a whole bunch of things and try and get this company to that next level, you probably are hiring someone who already has the communication ability right from the start, or you should be trying to hire someone that has that. So you're not spending time trying to take that extreme introvert and trying to make them be okay talking to the person to their right or left.
Are there interview tips or guides, or do you have interview questions that you typically try to use to on these types of characteristics that you're talking about?
So the way that I like to do interviews is it's 3 parts. So first part is a phone screen. Sell them. If you're asking this person to go through this journey of the interviews, and you're trying to judge their passion for what you're doing, you need to sell them right at the start about what you're doing. Don't wait until about to send out an offer letter, now let me tell you why it's so great to work here. They've probably already either counted you off or aren't going to be as interested as if you right from the start make it very clear about why the market opportunity that you're doing is huge, why the technology you're working on is so cool, and the problems you're trying to solve are complex and interesting. Then the second piece is try to get a gauge of 2 things out of them. First is their intelligence level. So just have a little bit of a conversation with them. Ask them questions. I always like to ask how'd you get to where you are? And see how they answer that. People that understand kind of the journey and not just the destination will answer that very differently. And then also ask them certain questions that kind of gauge whether they're a culture fit or not. So if you're a bunch of people that like to go surfing, ask them, what do you think of going to the ocean? If you're a group that wants to drink beer, ask them what their favorite beer is. So ask them a few things that kind of gauge that kind of human quality and that culture quality. And then lastly, I like to call them the killer questions. And so every single different position, I write kind of 4 or so of these questions that at least will give me a basis right off the bat for, do they have a fundamental understanding of what I'm talking about? So if you're hiring someone for a JavaScript position, do they know what a closure is? If you're hiring someone, for a CSS position, ask them to describe the box model and how it changed with CSS3. Whatever the subset is, come up with 4 questions that it's hey, they should have a basic understanding and be able to answer these questions. Especially if you get a resume from a recruiter, they love to throw in every keyword known to man onto the resume and make minor tweaks. And half the time, you'll be asking the person about something, and they'll be like, oh, I don't know that, and you'll be like, but it's on your resume. No, it's not. Then the second interview is a digital whiteboarding session. There was one team that loved pizza, and they scanned their favorite pizza place's menu in, and they essentially said, I want you to make this pizza menu into an e-commerce website. And guess what? We've done 50% of the work for you already. but let's dive into the code, and over the next hour, let's talk about how we're gonna build out the other functions. And they use that as kind of a gauge for how do they solve the problem, how do they deal with code that's already written, how do they immediately jump into something and get what the problem is you're trying to solve, and use that as, and it shouldn't just be you ask them a question and they do something, make it conversational in nature, to really ensure that they're actually able to solve problems and not just regurgitate code. And then when they come in, we do a few different things. We have them peer program with someone. So whatever problem they were working on that day, literally have the person take the chair, move over, and be like, great, do my work for me. And if they're able to do majority of the work for them and ask the right questions, and they sign off that, because my gauge for that is, are you willing to work with this person in this same capacity for the next month or 6 months or year? And if they're like, yeah, absolutely, I'd be more than happy to sit next to this person, that's a great gauge that you're on the right track for hiring, especially if you like the person they sat with. Make sure you pick the person that you really like for them to do that with. And then take them out to lunch or to beer or something like that, so you reiterate that kind of culture fit type thing of making sure they coalesce with the group and are part of the team.
Do you use offsite engineers or contractors to supplement some of your engineering stuff?
At the moment, we are not, but absolutely. In the past, I've used lots of offshore resources. I find you can outsource work if you do it one of two ways, and you have to be very considerate not to try and blend the two models. You actually interview the people just like you would interview someone who was going to be on your team, and you interview an individual. You're not looking for them to provide you a whole team of people. I just want one or two people. They're going to be on these teams, and they need to be at our stand-up, whatever time that is. So don't care what time it is on their time zone. Sure, they can do the rest of their work on their schedule. They work in our same software, whether it's Jira, Rally, or Trello, or whatever. So they are fundamentally part of the team, just like any other engineer that you would possibly have. So that way works great, and you manage them. The other way that it works is, I like to call the black box model, where essentially you come up with something that you are able to hand over wholly to them, and you are entirely okay with whatever decisions they make and the way that they're going to deliver it to you. When we launched our first native app on the iPhone for HauteLook, this was 2009. We were one of the first people with an e-commerce native app, and we weren't sure whether people would actually want to interact with us in that format. So we let someone else build it. They delivered something, and we knew that we were going to take it as an entire write-off if it didn't work well, and if it worked great, then guess what? We're prepared to spend the effort to rebuild from scratch the whole thing, because we knew whatever we would get would not be necessarily what our resources were going to be comfortable working in. So as long as you go either of those two models, it works fabulous. If you try and make it where, oh, they're handing over an entire team, but I'm going to semi-manage them, and I'm going to tell them how to work in our code base and what code they need to touch, and you're just going to find that it's not the way they're used to working. It's not, you haven't interviewed any of the people, so you might not like the quality of their code. You just run into lots of problems.
So you've now been involved in a handful of businesses that are heavily driven by SEO. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that from your point of view, how you've staffed around it, how you've built around it, and how you look at SEO now versus 5 years ago.
When we first launched HauteLook, SEO was good enough to actually have like this just entirely separate little section that had just tons of keywords and fake product and all that, where it was like this tiny little link on the bottom no one knew existed, and Google would search all of that, and great, we've got all these people coming to the site. Now if you're not, semantic in the way your HTML is written, and delivering the right content, and having user feedback loops on the page, and cross-linking between other sites to yours, it doesn't matter what keywords you have on the page, no one's going to find it. There are people who specialize in that, and there's some that don't cost a lot of money that are more than willing to just take a look at what you did. I wouldn't say have them come in and do all the work for you, just have them look at like, hey, best practices now. Am I doing them? What am I doing wrong? Like, should I be tagging my next button or my add to cart button slightly differently? You know, and they're able to kind of give some of that input. So.
You talked earlier about when developing, you usually test it out first. Could you discuss in a little more depth your kind of process for doing that? How many people you would test it on? At which point you decide you have enough data to make a decision?
You'd be surprised. Your loyal customers love being a part of your product, you know, and so you asking them to be a part of it, most of them are going to be, you know, more than happy to help play a role in that, you know, and especially, you know, for early stage companies, you know, it's these influencers that are, you know, want to feel like they have a say in the direction of the company, and so by you giving them that, it almost helps that kind of influence. And especially you're just going to immediately get the things that are just like, oh, that was totally non-intuitive, or what we wrote, the copy was just horrible, I need to change that because no one got what we were trying to ask them for. So you get some of those things really easily with just a few people. Then obviously the next stage of testing where you're actually doing changes to your site, there it's kind of more statistical in nature. So obviously you're going to have a control group, you're going to have at least one test group, if not multiple different test groups. And there you're just looking for kind of that statistical significance that kind of shows like, yeah, okay, this really is trending one way versus another. And tools like Optimizely, it's free up to, I don't know how many usages. I mean, it allows you to do a lot of that kind of easy testing right on the site, and sometimes not even need an engineer to do some of those things. And they have that kind of, you know, they have that gauge of whether it was actually statistically significant of a win or not, which is important. And then obviously, you know, if you're rebuilding features that, you know, people have been using for a while, you definitely want to get people into a channel and earlier rather than later of what you're thinking about, kind of how they might shop differently on the site. And there you would probably only roll it out to like a small percentage of your customers to make sure that you didn't get that conversion funnel terribly wrong or something like that, you know. Especially if you're dealing with money, you want to be more cautious on the number of people you test it to than if you're dealing with, you know, just kind of I'm just trying to see whether I get a few more clicks on this thing or people take a little more time on the site. There you can kind of blast it out a little bit at deeper levels to try and get that gauge earlier on, so you can keep iterating on it versus making sure you're not hurting your top line.
Finding technical talent for the research in this area?
Yeah.
What sources do you think are good and like what works for you?
Go to every meetup that there is, even if it's not necessarily for what you think you're trying to find, because, you know, you'd be surprised, you know, how many Python engineers show up at the continuous integration meetup, you know. Show up at all those sort of things. You know, first off, you're starting to make a name for yourself, and someone might know someone who eventually might talk and be like, oh, I'm thinking about, oh, I met a guy from that, you know. So just getting yourself out there is an important thing. Also doing talks at these types of meetups, you know, you talk about SEO. Well, if you've gone and talked somewhere or at some of these meetups, you know, guess what? Now you're on the web, and if someone did a search, they'd maybe find out that you talked about this interesting topic. Especially in your early stage, hesitate from using recruiters. They're really expensive, and even the ones that kind of take equity, you know, it's still expensive. So try and do it yourself. Eventually you might hit a point where it does make financial sense for you to utilize them, but definitely I think early stage, don't do that. You know, when you're only looking for one person, you're here in Santa Monica. This is the heart of it. You know, just hang out at the local bars, and everyone who walks in be like, hey, what do you do? And you're bound to find an engineer probably 5 or 10 questions in. So.
Kevin, we really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks
This
again
was fun.
for taking time to come talk to us.
Yeah, thanks.